Hey, welcome back to Business 101, Introduction to Business. We are now on our fourth video in module number 5, dealing with the topic of management. And as we continue to explore management and managers, in this particular video, what we're looking at is different types of managers. How do we understand and tier and categorize different types of managers? Well, there's a couple different ways that we can do that just to broaden our understanding of who managers are and what they do. So you can see in this next slide, there is a way to distinguish managers as tiered by level of responsibility. And you see sort of what we're talking about here as you just look at this, the bullet points on this slide. We can start at the very top of an organization, and there are top managers, the managers or manager responsible for an entire firm's overall performance and effectiveness. The top dog, the person at the top, the gal or the guy or gals or guys who together run the organization from the highest level, responsible for the overall performance, overall effectiveness, overall positioning in the marketplace, the overall success of the firm. Now, that's not all there are in terms of management in an organization. Especially in larger organizations, you'll have different levels. Besides the top managers, you may also have middle managers, described on this slide as the manager responsible for implementing the strategies and working towards the goals that are established by the top managers. And so there's several different ways to describe middle managers and understand them. Are they over particular geographical divisions? Do they oversee particular functional areas like the accounting manager or the production manager or the sales manager? Several different ways to look at that, and we'll look at that in a subsequent slide in this deck. But nevertheless, underneath the top managers, they will delegate actual responsibility to a tier of middle managers. And then from there, there are typically first line or front line managers. You see that the third bullet point on this slide, the manager responsible for the actual practical day-to-day supervision of the frontline employees, the folks who are doing the work, the folks who are engaging with customers, the actual salespeople or the production people. Those are frontline or first line managers. And of course, early on in all of our careers, that's typically the managers we deal with one-on-one on a personal level. Those are the folks that we report to on a day-to-day basis when we first start out our career. Now, that's at least one way to understand the different tiers of managers, tiered by their level of responsibility. But there are other ways to understand how different managers can be distinguished one from another. You see in this slide then the 3 different levels of management. You see here then on this next slide some examples of typical responsibilities that each of these 3 tiers of managers, tiered by responsibility, might typically have. Top managers, for instance, might have titles like the president or vice president, treasurer, chief executive officer, etc. And you see the responsibilities there. Responsible for the overall performance and effectiveness of the firm, or setting and establishing general policies. They formulate the strategies. They approve all the great, big, huge, significant decisions. And they represent the company in dealings with other firms and with governmental bodies. In fact, many times when you see, for instance, a petroleum disaster like a leak in the Gulf of Mexico, who does the press go to talk to? They go to talk to the CEO of the entire company to make a formal press announcement of those kinds of things. That's examples. And then below that, you see examples of the kinds of responsibilities that middle managers with titles like the plant manager, or the operations manager, or the division manager, right? They're responsible for implementing the strategies and working towards the goals that were set by, well, the top managers, the folks above them. And finally, first-line managers who have titles like supervisor, project manager, office manager, etc., right? You see there example responsibilities, responsible for supervising the work of employees who report to them, and ensuring that employees understand or are properly trained in company policies and procedures. Now, we can also understand different categories and tiers of managers by their functional area. And you'll notice here is just looking at the different colored blocks here, human resource managers, operations managers, marketing managers. You can tell, if you think about it from the perspective of formal college education, that these bear striking similarity to some of the majors that you might have, right? You might be a HR major or a finance major, an accounting major. And of course, what we're really talking about is functional area, functional specialty within an organization, right? So human resource managers would be responsible for what? Hiring and training employees, evaluating the performance, setting and determining compensation levels for different categories of employees, etc. Whereas operations managers, you can see there, they're ultimately responsible for the production, the adequate levels of inventory and quality control, especially if, of course, you're producing products rather than services. Marketing managers, responsible for getting products from producers to consumers. And of course, we'll talk a little bit more about marketing in a subsequent module as we continue in this survey of topics in Introduction to Business. What you need to know now, of course, for marketing is, and that's certainly one way to describe it, responsible for getting products from producers to consumers. There are information managers. Now, in some senses, all managers must be information managers, but in terms of specialty by functional area, there may in some organizations actually be information managers who design and implement systems, typically information technology systems, to gather, organize, and distribute the information to all the necessary required parties. And finally, right, the way we keep score in business here in the United States, we keep score with dollars and cents, and therefore there have to be financial managers to plan and oversee both accounting and finance functions. And those are two different things. We'll talk about that in the last couple modules in this course during this term. Nevertheless, that's another way to group managers by functional area. Now, in addition to the way that we can think about different managers, another way to look at it is for any manager in any functional area at any level, there are simultaneously different roles that a manager may need to serve. In other words, part of being a manager means you got to wear several hats at once. Sometimes you have to wear 2 or 3 or maybe 4 or 5, all within the same particular setting. And this, of course, varies in terms of emphasis based upon your functional area, as well as where you are in terms of your level of responsibility in an organization. But nevertheless, you see here 3 broad categories of management roles before you on this slide. The first, interpersonal roles. Managerial roles including role as the figurehead of the organization, or a leader, or a liaison between 2 parties. That's one set of, or at least one category of roles that managers oftentimes have to serve. A second are informational roles. And what does that mean? It means your role as a manager includes monitoring information, appropriately disseminating or sharing information with employees, and sometimes operating as the firm's spokesperson to external parties, whether that's the press or investors, outside vendors, suppliers, consumers, etc., etc. The third broad category on this slide, decisional roles. As a manager, you will have to make decisions and take action, and those can follow along roles such as an entrepreneur within a company, a disturbance handler, a resource allocator, or even a negotiator between 2 parties, perhaps even 2 parties in conflict. Now, in this next slide, we see at least some examples of each of those roles so that you can sort of put some flesh on the skeleton, so to speak, as you can understand what these roles refer to. Just let me, rather than reading them all at you, because this is reproduced from your textbook and you can read them there, but just a couple of examples. So for instance, you see there in the interpersonal category the role of figurehead, and the sample activity is given there, of course, is attending a ribbon cutting ceremony for the new plant on behalf of the entire company. You serve then as a figurehead as the primary lead representative for the entire company at some big ceremony like that, right? Whereas you can see there in the second category, the informational category, that sometimes being an information disseminator means communicating new organizational initiatives to everyone that needs to know what those initiatives are, whether those are employees within your location, perhaps employees not at your location at some other division or some other geographical factory or plant or something like that. And you have to decide, is the appropriate way to disseminate the information accurately through an email, through a memo, through the corporate internal newsletter, through a personal phone call, to a Zoom call, to getting on an airplane and traveling to Montpelier, Idaho to go chat with the folks over there, right? You have to decide what is the best way and most effective way to disseminate information to everyone who needs it. Now, the third category, decisional, right? You can sort of see there are several different roles there. An entrepreneur, you may say, well, wait a minute, entrepreneurs, don't they just start up new companies? No, an entrepreneur is someone who is advocating and developing and fostering new ideas, and it can be obviously within an existing organization. Sometimes that's the role of the manager, championing new ideas and new initiatives. Or as a resource allocator, you see there second from the bottom, reviewing and revising budget requests. You, as a manager, may have to make some difficult decisions. Who gets all the resources they're requesting? Who may only get a portion of the resources they're requesting? And how do you broker those kinds of agreements? So you see there then some different examples of different managerial roles. More on that in the textbook. How does this really help us to understand management? Well, let me put it this way. As we begin to explore our understanding of who managers are and what they do, it is helpful for us to be able to categorize different hats that a manager has to wear and how different hats at different stages of our career become more of an emphasis or less of an emphasis. Well, what does that mean? Well, think about this for a moment. One of the roles of many managers is to be a disturbance handler. We saw that on the previous slide, right? You have two of employees you manage, they come to you with a dispute or a conflict. You may have to serve as the negotiator and the intermediary in order to get those two parties to agree. That can be very, very common when you're a first-line manager, when you're the one directly dealing and managing with frontline employees, right? However, think about this for a moment. If you're the CEO of a multinational corporation like, I don't know, British Petroleum or Amazon.com, how frequently do you have to handle the role of being the disturbance handler between two employees who aren't getting along with each other? And obviously the answer is not nearly as frequently, if at all, as the frontline manager. You see, the emphasis on different roles will be different depending on where your role is in the organization, where you are in terms of level of tier and responsibility, and all those kinds of things, right? I mean, it can be argued that the chief and perhaps only primary roles of a CEO in a large organization, the chief executive officer, is to serve as the mouthpiece to the press and the media and to make very, very, very large decisions about overall 5-year goals of what a company will be about. And really that's maybe all that a CEO does besides overseeing division presidents, vice presidents, and those kinds of things, right? And so you can see there that as we talk about different levels of managers, as well as different roles and responsibilities, these are meant as a sampling of what it means to be a manager in all sorts of different levels and roles. And your emphasis may differ depending on the organization, the environment, your career path, your level with an organization, all sorts of different things. But I hope that gives us a taste at least, or a flavor, or an introduction into who managers are and what they do as we continue our exploration of the topic of management. I hope that's helpful. We'll see you in the next lecture.